Hey everybody, welcome back to the Hellacious Hero Returns. I am Hellacious Hero Joe. And on today's episode, I'm going to do something that I did in a similar vein to the Judas Priest episode where I ranked the Judas Priest records from my least favorite to my favorite. Today I'm going to be trying to conquer the discography of the mighty Black Sabbath. I don't know if anybody knows this, or maybe you don't know this about me, but Black Sabbath, outside of Iron Maiden, Iron Maiden is my favorite band. But outside of Iron Maiden, Black Sabbath is a very close second. And everything that they've done, in particular the stuff that they did with Ronnie James Dio, who, outside of Maiden, let me say this, is like my favorite artist of all time with everything he did. We're talking about, Elf, Rainbow, Black Sabbath, and then his solo work, the Dio Band. Everything that he touched, in my opinion, in regards to all that stuff I just mentioned, was pretty damn good. I mean, it was gold. I mean, everything he touched turned to gold. The guy was just a legend. I miss him horribly, and that might give you some inclination as to what this list is going to look like. But yeah, before I dive into ranking these albums, please go check out my podcast. I created this with a friend of mine many years ago, back in 2018. So it's been about 6 years now, going on 7. It's called A Matter of Life and Maiden, the podcast of the Beast. It's on YouTube. Go check it out. I post on there frequently with some tour speculation, album speculation, my experience with Iron Maiden, how they've influenced my life, what they've done for me, what I love about them, and yeah, it's a really cool podcast to get into and kind of give you a glimpse into what I love about metal music and prog rock music, etc., etc. Some of my favorite players, my favorite artists, and my favorite kind of themes that run through metal music. And I think Maiden in general is a band that really harnesses that power and touches on things that I'm deeply passionate about. I'm a historian. I love philosophy. I love science fiction. I love fantasy and culture and all those different things, and they touch on that. Now, with that being said, as we dive into Black Sabbath, they're kind of like the pioneers of this, along with Judas Priest. I think Sabbath was kind of first, then Priest, then later bands like Maiden, and the people who would kind of emulate them, the new wave of British heavy metal. But Black Sabbath is one of the foundational pillars of heavy metal music as we know it. Back then it was more called hard rock. It's kind of different, and that kind of evolved into heavy metal. Black Sabbath is from Birmingham, in the United Kingdom, and around the areas of England, and they had heavy metal workshops there where they would work on heavy metals, like factories and foundries and all these different things. Where Tony Iommi the guitar player for Black Sabbath, got his fingertips cut off when he was going to a sheet metal factory, and a piece of the sheet metal came down as he was working with it and putting it through the feed to get it pressed and pounded, and took his fingertips off. And it's crazy to think that, but that's how much more heavy metal can you get? That's the clear definition. A piece of heavy metal came down and ripped off Iommi's fingertips. And another reason I love Iommi is because, yes, he's from the UK, England, but he's of Italian ancestry, and he's left-handed, and that's where I'm at too. I'm a lefty, but I play guitar righty, just because I've been practicing that way for so many years now. It's funny because initially when I started playing guitar, I would air guitar like a lefty would, because it seemed natural to me. And then when I started playing, because my friend, Matt, who I created the podcast with, he was a righty, so it was weird for me to kind of try to learn from him while I was trying to emulate with a left-handed guitar. So I ended up buying a right-handed guitar. Ironically, the first guitar I actually learned how to play stuff on was an SG copy, like Iommi. And I have 2 SGs now that I really love. I have a green one and a red one, and they're because of Tony Iommi. And that's kind of the gold standard. He's one of the pioneers. He's one of my favorite guitar players of all time, outside of the boys in Maiden. And, also, just to throw it in here before I dive in again, Richie Blackmore. I mean, the Boys and Maiden, Adrian's my favorite, then Davey, then Yan. Right after them, it's Iommi and Blackmore, too, is some of the greatest. And I mentioned Ronnie Dio. He played with both of them. And he made some amazing, legendary, timeless, classic albums with both of them. But today, I digress. I went off on a tangent. I'm sorry. I'm a musician, and I love music, and this kind of music anyway. And I needed to spill my guts on that real quick before we dive in. So, jumping in, I'm going to go from my least favorite to my favorite. And there's 20 albums. I included the Heaven and Hell record in here because it technically is the Heaven and Hell lineup and the Mob Rules lineup of Black Sabbath. So even though the name is different because they wanted to differentiate between the main Black Sabbath band that had Ozzy and the Heaven and Hell, lineup with Dio, I'm throwing it in here because it's basically Black Sabbath. So it's in here as well, the Heaven and Hell record. So coming in at number 20, the worst or the least favorite, in my opinion, record is Forbidden. Forbidden. This came out in 1995. It's not that great. I'm giving it a 4 out of 10. And this is for the original release. They did a remix recently, a couple months ago. They released a box set. Black Sabbath did. Tony Iommi did. Called Anno Domini. It was the years with the Tony Martin era. And they did a remix of this record. And honestly, it's improved significantly. I mean, I'm basing it right now on the original release. But if I were to say, like right now in 2024 with the remix, I crank it up to like a 6, 6.5. But this one's getting a 4 out of 10, the original. It's just bad production. It's not good. Ernie C. is the producer on this from the band Body Count. I think it was Ice-T. Ice-T's band, his heavy metal rap band that he had back in the 90s. And it's not Sabbath. It's missing the ingredients that made, the stuff that they did before with Tony Martin, the stuff that they did before with Ronnie, the stuff that they did with Ozzy, the good stuff, the original, run of albums with Ozzy. It doesn't have any real magic about it. It's a dud. It's a dud. It's like their No Prayer for the Dying if you're comparing it to Iron Maiden stuff. And I think No Prayer is actually better. And, that's that's me going out on a whim and saying, No Prayer is better. Some of the highlights on it that might be okay, that are okay. I guess the title track is halfway decent. Rusty Angels is alright. I don't know. Guilty as Hell, Kiss of Death. They're uninspired. It's just an uninspired record. There's no clear vision on it. They're trying to do too many things and try to mesh this kind of rap metal feel with this kind of classic heavy metal, doom metal feel. It doesn't work. And the thing that stinks about it is like there's no real progressive elements in it. There's not enough, and just these incongruent ideas that just don't formulate into something that makes it worthwhile. And that's sad because it's the last album they did for the longest time until Ronnie came back into the band in like the mid 2000s, which was like 10 years later almost, and they started doing the Heaven and Hell lineup then at that point. It was almost like they were just doing, basically kind of like history tours, going around playing their classic catalog because they had no new material at that point. So, I mean, it is what it is. But there's a lot of turmoil in the band, people in and out over the years, over and over again. Ronnie, like I said, Ozzy, even Tony Martin in and out several times. Different drummers in and out. Cozy Powell in and out. Bill Ward always saying he'd come back and then he's out. Vinny Appice coming in to take over. And it was kind of a mess. And even Geezer in and out several times. So it's just been it's where they were at the time. It was just they were trying to churn something out for the sake of it, to have a new album, and it wasn't worthwhile. Moving on from Forbidden, number 19. This one is the last record with Ozzy, and it's 1978's Never Say Die. This record is another bad one, if I had to say so. I'm giving it a little bit of a slight edge over Forbidden. I'll give it a 5 out of 10 instead of a 4 out of 10. But with that being said, I mean, it's nothing to write home about. It's truly the reason Ozzy probably left the band and got kicked out, just because it was uninspired. It was very similar to Forbidden in that way. Didn't have a lot of great stuff on it. Didn't really have things that were, Black Sabbath was known for. Like, where's all this really cool progressive experimental stuff you guys had done, on the previous albums? Where's all the really cool, doomy, hard rocky, like just dark, ambient, atmospheric songs if you're not going to go the heavy route, The title track is okay. Johnny Blade is halfway decent. Honestly, other than that, it's pretty bad. I mean, it's pretty bad, and honestly, with the remix of Forbidden coming out recently this year, this would automatically be the weakest album. If I was ranking this based on the Forbidden remix instead of the original release, this would be the worst Black Sabbath album. But with that being said, I mean, Ozzy is walking around on stage at this point in time, clapping his hands in the Dio documentary, Ozzy's walking around clapping his hands like a penguin, they say, He's just out of his mind. I don't know if it was drugs. I don't know if it was because he was disgruntled with the way things were going. And then obviously, when he leaves and he goes and does a solo career, he makes some pretty damn good, amazing records. His first run around with his first couple tries with Randy Rhoads. So I mean, it's not like either he got his act together and got his shit together, and he was just tired of being in this kind of band and he wanted to be the leader, because let's face it, this is Tony's band, right? So maybe he just wanted to have that soul power and soul control. I mean, artists do that. You look, comparing it to Iron Maiden again, Bruce was the same way. In the 1990s, when he left after Fear of the Dark, he was like, I'm gonna go do my solo stuff. I want to be the boss. I don't want to listen to Steve's band, Iron Maiden, just like this. It's Tony's band. So that could be a possibility. And with that being said, though, I think it's also the fact that they're creatively just dried up. It's at this point in time, they've been around for over a decade as a band and have made some of the greatest freaking albums ever. And now they're just running out of ideas and inspiration, I feel like, too, because it's not just Ozzy who's messing up. I mean, Geezer was the songwriter for the longest time. He's not really writing anything that's significant or great. Tony's not really contributing or writing anything that's significant or great. So Bill never really had. So I mean, it's just kind of like a dry record. And honestly, it's crazy when you look back at this stuff and see how things changed over time, because Ozzy leaving the band was probably the best thing for them, because then they come out with some pretty damn amazing stuff with Ronnie, and we'll talk about that later down the line. But moving on from Never Say Die, the penultimate record with Ozzy, coming in at number 18, is 1976's Technical Ecstasy. This one, again, much like I said with Never Say Die, it's kind of uninspiring, but I will say, as far as this one's concerned, there's some better stuff on here. Backstreet Kids is pretty good. Gypsy's not bad. I like Rock and Roll Doctor. I like Dirty Women. It's a pretty halfway decent album. It's definitely a level up from the first two I talked about. It's a 6.5 out of 10. I'd give it right around there, 6.5. It's one that I go back to and listen to occasionally, because there are some gems on it, and it has a different feel and a different sound. It's very toned down. It's kind of like almost more like a progressive rock album than it sounds like the original Black Sabbath stuff. And I think for them it was like a turn. It was like, hey, let's try something a little bit different. Let's cut back on some of the doomy riffs and some of the heaviness, and let's just make something that's kind of proggy. And I think for them at the time, when it came out in 1976, it was kind of like, what are you guys doing? It was just like this, it was too far to an extreme where they didn't have enough of the old stuff, intermingled in with this new ideology. And they didn't really create these kind of like full bombastic compositions that they had done before. I mean, we're talking about people who wrote, Children of the Grave, Iron Man, Paranoid, War Pig, songs like that. I mean, Spiral Architect, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, those kind of songs. You don't get that with this record, and that's something to be said too. Some of the first records they did with Ozzy were stuff where they created just these timeless songs. These last two records with Oz, ones I just talked about, Never Say Die, and the one we're talking about now, Technical Ecstasy, it's never cranked things up to that level where they were recognizable, or they had things on them that kind of stuck with you. Like when you listened to the record and you got to the end of it, you were like, holy shit, that was amazing. Technical Ecstasy, Never Say Die, and Forbidden just didn't do that. When you got to the end of the record, you were like, that's it? That's kind of what it left you with. It was like a that's it impression. And that's kind of why these are where they're at. And over the years, Technical Ecstasy has kind of went up on my list because of some of the proggy elements of it and the idea that they're trying to do stuff different. But if you're looking at it in the scope of Black Sabbath and what they've churned out, since their inception until they ended as a band and retired from touring and retired from music in 2017, that's kind of where this is going to be, for me. And I don't think it's really going to move up anytime soon. For now, anyway. Maybe later in my life. But right now, it's sitting at number 18. Moving on from Technical Ecstasy and coming in at number 17, this one takes a step up. Number 17 is going to be Born Again from 1983. This one has Ian Gillan from Deep Purple fame on vocals. And I gotta say, it's pretty damn good. I'm giving it a 7.25 out of 10. Now, the reason I'm giving it a 7.25 and not any higher, and maybe this is something on my part, and maybe it's, just me being biased about it in a negative way. Maybe it's a negative bias. But it sounds like Deep Purple. I mean, it sounds like Deep Purple. It's basically Deep Purple with Tony Iommi is what it sounds like. It's not Richie as a guitar player now. It's Tony. And while that's cool, and I think that's interesting and it's neat, and the album actually is really good, 7.25. Again, in the scope of what Sabbath has done in their career, it's just a record that is kind of like, it's like a one-shot. It's a one-shot record. It's almost like if you're a comic book collector, instead of getting an entire run of comics and there's this whole complete awesome story, there's just one standalone graphic novel. And there's no sequels or prequels to it. Like, that's just it. That's kind of what it is. It's in its own little world. It's kind of isolated from the rest of the Sab discography. But with that being said, I think it's really cool. I think they did some really cool experimental and progressive stuff on this. Like, Trashed is an awesome song. Stonehenge, the instrumental is really cool. Disturbing the Priest is cool. Zero to Hero is awesome. Born Again, the title track is amazing. Hotline's really good. And I think it kicks ass. I do. But like I said, it's more like Deep Purple and Black Sabbath. And really, that's what it is. I mean, it's the lead singer and the front man from Deep Purple joining pretty much the Sabbath lineup with Iommi, Geezer, and Bill Ward. And while I think it's a step up from the previous ones we talked about, it's definitely better than the Ozzy stuff, the late Ozzy stuff, the Never Say Die and Technical Ecstasy stuff. It's still not the most refined, most complete record. Now, here's the thing. I will say this. I feel like if Ian did do another record with the band, or two, and it was like a trilogy of albums, maybe this would kind of hold a more significant place in the scope of things. But when they did this, and when Ian was in the band, I think they intended to do that too. They intended to do another album or two with him. But then the Deep Purple reunion happened, and he kind of was just like, oh, I see you guys, I'm out. And they went and they did Perfect Strangers. So, that's kind of, it's not that he stabbed them in the back, or maybe he did, I don't know. But he went back with his original band where he was from, and it's not that he didn't like Black Sabbath, he didn't like Tony. It was just, his style and the whole, the lineup of, Roger came back, Mark II lineup, Roger Glover, Ian Pace, Richie Blackmore, John Lord, Ian. It was an amazing reunion, and Perfect Strangers is a kick-ass album. But I digress into Deep Purple territory here. That's funny about these years. Deep Purple and like Sabbath are so intertwined together. It's unreal. And Rainbow and all that stuff, they're all mixed together into all these different pieces. Pieces of these bands are all in this lineup, and sometimes it makes it hard to talk about, and you have to kind of go off on a tangent because of just how it is. But back to Born Again, just a really cool record with the frontman from Deep Purple. Very different sounding, but not. I mean, it sounds like Sabbath. I'll give the band that. I mean, it's vocally sounds different, but there's a lot of the doomy and progressive undertones with this record that Sabbath is known for, and I think that's what makes it kind of, in the upper bottom level of my ranking list, just because of that. It is a good record. It is a good record. Moving on from Born Again, coming in at number 16 for me is 13, the last record they did. It's a 7.5 out of 10. Ozzy came back for this one. They had, I think, one of the guys from Lamb of God played drums on this, and Tommy Clufetos played live. But 13 is a really cool album. There's some really cool songs on it that I really dig. The thing about this is, it takes it back to the original bare bones structure of the original Sabbath albums. The progressive edge is here, kind of, but it almost sounds too much like the original stuff. And, that again, that's biased from me. While I love the original Sabbath stuff with Ozzy, you're going to see where, my favorite stuff lies. And in a way, this is awesome because it's the original lineup again, minus, Bill Ward. But everything is really concrete, and it is complete, and the compositions are awesome, and they have a lot of really cool songs in this. Now, the original standard edition has 8 songs. The bonus track edition has 12 songs on it, with one live song. But I love Damaged Soul. It's my favorite song on the record. I think it's awesome. End of the Beginning is really good. God is Dead is awesome. Age of Reason kicks ass. And then some of the bonus tracks, Methodemic, Peace of Mind, and Pariah, they're all pretty damn good too. So I do really like this record. I think Tony as a player is really showcasing his chops on this, his guitar playing chops, and how he's kind of progressed since the inception of Black Sabbath to this point in time at the present, 2013, with the release of 13. So I think it's a very, very complete album. I will say that. I do believe that. So, but at the end of the day, the production is a little shoddy. I'm not saying it's horrible, but it is kind of like compressed in some places a lot, and there's things about it that you can kind of, it seems kind of artificial in some places, and it's not, it doesn't have like a live feel to it like a lot of their early stuff did, or their stuff in the early 80s. Rick Rubin produced this one, and I know that he's been hit over the years, the last decade or more, with issues about how he produces and compression and all these things. But I think it's pretty good. I'm not saying it's lackluster or horrible or trash. I'm not bad mouthing Rick Rubin, but I do think it could have been a little polished and a little better. And I think the band worked with a lot more producers down the line in the past who just had a better understanding of what kind of sound Sabbath should have. I give Rick Rubin credit for doing this, and I think, it was a huge task to take on, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, hard rock heavy metal band of all time, in the legendarium of that kind of genre of music. But with that being said, a solid record. Personally, not my favorite for those reasons that I mentioned. So that's kind of where this is at. And these next couple records after 13 are kind of in that same kind of vein with it, but I like these just a tad bit better when I think about it. When I think about them and some of the songs on these records, the production, the vocal lines, the lyrics, all that stuff. So coming in after 13 is number 15, Cross Purposes with Tony Martin. This one I also give a 7.5. This came out in 1994. And as far as the Tony Martin albums are concerned, outside of Forbidden, I like this one the least. I like it a lot. Tony Iommi and the Black Sabbath band had a lot of say in the production on this one with Leif Massis. They produced this in Wales, this record. It's good. Some of the songs I really like on it are Cross of Thorns, I think, is really cool. Eyewitness is a cool song. Cardinal Sin and Evil Eye are really neat. I like Back to Eden. I like the record, Immaculate Deception. I think it's neat. But Tony Martin is pushing his vocals on this one to a place where he's trying to create and, really kind of like cement himself as a songwriter and a staple in this band. And he has a ton of writing credits on this. And another thing I like about Evil Eye, the song, is Eddie Van Halen does like a guest solo on it, which is cool. So that's really neat. And I love Van Halen. Eddie Van Halen's one of my favorite guitar players too. So that's cool that he's on this. But a lot of it is kind of more of the same of what they did on previous albums with Tony Martin before this, but not to the level of those records, if that makes sense. It's almost like it's good, but it's not excellent. Some of the stuff, Tony Martin, I will say this right now, is an underrated singer in this band. He has done some pretty damn kick-ass stuff. And not this record, though. This record is good. It's good. But it doesn't hit that gear for me that takes it to the next level. It doesn't take it to the awesome progressive sound and level that some of the other records he did with the band go to. And again, you got a different drummer on this. You got Bobby Rodinelli on this. He's okay. It's not like the stuff with Cozy Powell and Bill Ward, the original stuff, and Vinny Appice. He's decent. But again, this is where these guys are kind of like on and off again. Tony Martin's coming into the band. He's coming out of the band. It's all this different stuff. I don't know if it's animosity or it's almost like they're having an identity crisis. They don't know what they want to do. They don't know if they want Dio as the front runner. They don't know if they want Ozzy. They don't know if they want Tony. And they're just going through all these different people. And Tony eventually comes back and stays and creates this record. So that's another reason too. You can tell that some of this stuff is kind of rushed. Some of this stuff is, Tony Iommi's trying to, churn out a new album because he has all these creative ideas with the rest of the guys in the band, but they just don't know what is pretty much best for them at this point in time in the 90s. And again, the 1990s were an era in a section in time where hard rock and heavy metal was on the back burner to grunge and popular punk. So that's another reason. They're trying to be creative. And that's another reason with Forbidden too, why they tried to do some of those things, to be different and stand out. And then, obviously in the late 90s, early 2000s, heavy metal makes a comeback, and now it's, back to a really high, recognized, appreciated status, which is awesome, because that's where it deserves to be. That's where it should stay. And I see it staying there for the foreseeable future because of just the message that heavy metal music sends in general. With that being said, Cross Purposes is tied with 13. I like it a little bit better. I think the production's better. I like Tony Martin's vocals on this. I like the fact that he's trying to, expand a little bit and get out of the box with some of the songs. So it's tied with 13, 7.5. Slight edge to Cross Purposes, though, for me. Moving on from Cross Purposes, coming in at number 14 is The Eternal Idol from 1987. I'm giving this one a 7.75 out of 10, so this one's a little bit better. A step up from 13 and Cross Purposes. Another record recorded with Tony Martin. Now, the thing with this is they had a vocalist from Badlands, Ray Gilman, on this, who sadly passed away shortly after he left the band and decided not to be in the band for whatever reason. He passed away from a disease, sexually transmitted disease, sadly. But his vocals, Ray Gilman, unparalleled. I mean, if he would have lived and stayed in this band, who knows what they could have churned out. With that being said, though, Tony Martin is a good replacement, and I think he filled the void of what needed to be filled. He did take Black Sabbath in a really cool progressive direction. And with The Eternal Idol, I think some of the songs on here are just really interesting and progressive and really cool. This is a record that is often overshadowed and overlooked, and I think it deserves, your attention if you're a Sabbath fan. If you haven't given the Tony Martin era or the eras outside of Dio and Ozzy any attention or love, you should, because it's a very, very cool and interesting record. The song The Shining is awesome to open up the record. I think it's kick-ass. I love Ancient Warrior. I love Born to Lose, Nightmare. The title track, Eternal Idol, is awesome. In 2010, they did like a deluxe edition where they released this song called Black Moon. It was a B-side, and Some Kind of Woman as a B-side. They're both really cool songs, too. This is a record that really showcases kind of like the progressive edge they had with Dio, the classic stuff they had with Oz, and mixes it together up to this point. I think it's just really interesting. And that's kind of what Tony Martin is in general. He's a nice mixture of Ozzy and Dio, if I had to describe him as a frontman. Like he kind of brings that gravelly kind of voice that Oz had with the undertones, and then not as good as Ronnie, but he does have a higher vocal range where he can kind of sing in that register and express the mythological and fantastical and philosophical kind of things that Ronnie brought to the band too. So while I don't think he's as good as either of those guys in their, in their niches or their respective categories as singers or their lyrics or how they, enunciate words and how they sing, when you combine both of those together, Ozzy and Dio, you get Tony Martin, and I think that's why he fits so well with these records. And that's why Eternal Idol is a 7.75 out of 10 for me, and sitting at number 14. Moving on from that, number 13, this record gets an 8 out of 10, and again, this is 1986's 7-star. This one has another Deep Purple member singing on it, and it's the bassist and singer Glenn Hughes from Deep Purple. And I got to be honest with you, while this record was supposed to be a Tony Iommi solo venture, because he was trying, this is like right around the time where stuff was going, haywire with the band. Ian Gillan left to go back and do Perfect Strangers with Deep Purple. Dio had left the band a couple years before that. Obviously, Ozzy's out of the band doing his solo work. Tony's like, you know what, maybe I should go do some solo stuff. He writes Seven Star, but because the band manager, Don Arden, who is Ozzy's father-in-law, Sharon Osbourne, he was the band manager of Black Sabbath. He said, listen, just put the Black Sabbath name on it, and we'll just call it, Black Sabbath featuring Tony Iommi, Seven Star, which I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. Looking at it technically in name and in production and in the scope of things, in the annals of history, it is a Black Sabbath record. But the thing about it is, it's really, if you listen to the record, it's a solo Tony Iommi album, but it sounds absolutely phenomenal. Tony just rips on this record. He lets loose with his guitar playing. It has this really awesome progressive edge. And Glenn Hughes at the time, too, was going to sing on this, but he was having his own issues with personal stuff, drug problems, whatever was going on with him. And this is when they got Ray Gillan to actually come in, and he filled in on the tour dates that Glenn Hughes was supposed to play on for Seven Star, and then later they did Eternal Idol and recorded it after the fact. But yeah, this record is pretty damn kick-ass. I gotta say, I love it. I love it. I love every song on the record. And that's why it's up here for me. And it's an 8 out of 10. I love In for the Kill. I love Turn the Stone. The title track is phenomenal. Danger Zone is amazing. Heart Like a Will, phenomenal. Like, the solo work on this is killer. In Memory's awesome. Angry Heart, Sphinx, The Guardian. Like that. It's an awesome album. Glenn Hughes sounds kick-ass on this. I mean, honestly, if he would have had his shit together and he would have stayed in the band, they could have churned out some amazing material with Glenn. And I think he nails the vocals on this. He sounds really damn good. I like this record a lot. The problem with it is, like I said, it's coming down to the fact is like, Black Sabbath fans or fans of Iommi or fans of Glenn Hughes or fans of Purple or whatever, you look at this and you're like, well, is this really a Sabbath album or is it an Iommi solo work? Like I said, technically labeled in the annals of history, this is a Black Sabbath album. And I think it's a damn good one. And it's super progressive. I like it a lot. It kicks ass. And if you notice, when we go down the line here with the rest of these albums till we get to number 1, I like progressive rock and progressive metal music. So this for me is like my bread and butter. It's a feast. It's a smorgasbord. I love it. So with that being said, 7 star at number 13 for that reason. It sounds amazing. Hughes is amazing. Tony rips up on this with his solo work. I can't say it enough. I mean, he sounds absolutely killer on this. Another thing about some of these records I failed to mention, Jeff Nichols plays keyboards on this stuff. He came around the time when Dio joined the band in 1980. He was originally coming in to play bass for Geezer, who kept coming in and out of the band, but then he ended up staying and being the keyboard player for a lot of the subsequent albums after that. There's also Dave Spitz on bass on this one, a guy who, like I said, the bass and the drums for these albums after the Dio years kind of just fluctuate on and off again. Eric Singer from Kiss actually plays drums on this, which is really cool. So that's an interesting fact. Moving on from 7 star, number 12. I give this one also an 8 out of 10. This is 1990s Tear. This one's produced by Tony Iommi and the drummer, Cozy Powell. Cozy Powell, amazing drummer. He played with some of the greats. Jeff Beck, played with Ritchie Blackmore and Dio in the Rainbow albums, Rising and Long Live Rock and Roll. Played with Keith Emerson and Greg Lake. Those guys, the original Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and then it was Emerson, Lake and Powell, ELP. He's played with some amazing people. Did some stuff with Brian May from Queen. Like he was a great drummer, one of the greatest of all time. He tragically died in a car accident in the 1990s. He was drinking alcohol, and there was something going on where he was apparently involved with a married woman, but it was his girlfriend, and there was some stuff going on. But he was in a car accident, and he was going super fast when it was like really rainy outside or something like that, and he got ejected from the car. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and he tragically died. So it's sad. I mean, he was a damn good drummer. I love all the work he did with Rainbow and Sab and all those bands I mentioned. And this album is no exception. I mean, his drumming work on this is phenomenal. This record is one of my favorite Black Sabbath albums. You know, it's in terms of like a mythological standpoint and a really nice fusion of what they did in the past with Ozzy and the stuff they did with Dio in the 80s. This is just an album that I love and has a lot of really cool songs on it. It's very mystical. It has a very nice, really cool, like storyteller vibe to it. It's based on Norse mythology. Anno Mundi to open it up is unbelievable. The Lawmaker's great. Jerusalem. The Sabbath Stones, that song is one of the coolest damn Black Sabbath songs ever. It's heavy. Tony's guitar work is immense on this. It's beautiful. The instrumental, The Battle of Tyr, is amazing. Odes and Court's great. Valhalla feels good to me. And the closer, Heaven in Black, is awesome. This record from top to bottom is an awesome album. And it's very, very reminiscent of the stuff with Dio. This one in particular is probably the closest thing to the Dio years that I can probably think of with Tony Martin. And just absolutely killer. Neil Murray plays bass on this one. Just a record that you have to put on and listen to. I mean, it's very, like I said, it's very mystical. When you listen to it, you know, you'll feel like you're listening to an older album. It doesn't feel like it came out in 1990. It feels like it's more of like an 80s release, because it does have that kind of new wave of British heavy metal, Iron Maiden-y, Judas Priest-y kind of feel to it, which is awesome. And I really, really think that it's a good record. Now, outside of that, I don't really have much to say about it. That's kind of what it is. And kind of tied into this next one here, coming at number 11, Headless Cross, which I give a slight edge. I give this one an 8.25 out of 10. This one also is absolutely awesome. This came out in 1989, so a year before. And this one also has Tony Martin. Just amazing. And again, same production and everything, produced by Tony Iommi and Cozy Powell. These two records, kind of to piggyback off a Tyr and kind of get into Headless Cross, again, just this kind of like good and evil, angels and demons, light and darkness vibe and motif to it. It's really awesome. It opens up on an instrumental, The Gates of Hell, and it goes right into the title track, Headless Cross, which is absolutely phenomenal. Phenomenal. I mean, I love it. Devil and Daughter, When Death Calls, Killing the Spirit World, Call of the Wild, Black Moon, Nightwing, and then there's a bonus track on the picture disc version, Cloak and Dagger, which is freaking amazing. Like, this album is a ride, man. Just much like Tyr. I mean, these two records are kind of like, they're almost like, you know, a tandem. They go together super well. And I think that's a really cool thing about them. Now, to touch on some of the other Tony Martin albums, you know, we talked about Forbidden and how that was at the bottom of the list. And Cross Purposes, you know, slightly above that, a couple spots up. But the identity with those, like I said, is kind of off. This is where, like Tyr and Headless Cross, they have, and Eternal Idol too as well. The reason why that's a little bit lower too is because, again, lineup changes. It's supposed to be Ray Gillen, then Tony, but this is Tony Martin on this record and with Tyr, really expressing himself as an artist and trying to create this blueprint, and not going too far off the deep end or going to an extreme. He's really containing this stuff and keeping it in the scope of Sabbath and what they represented over the last, you know, decade and a half or 20 years at this point. And I think he does a really good job of that with these two records. More so than the other two he did. You know, this is just something that phenomenal composite of musical ideas, and this and Tear are, in my opinion, the best Tony Martin era Sabbath albums, and some of the coolest, different, most progressive and unique Sabbath albums, period. So, again, same thing that I said about Tear, to echo off of it, has a very mystical kind of vibe to it. There's a darkness to it, much like there was with early Sabbath stuff, and but also a really cool mystical component with like the more Dio focused stuff. These two records are really, really cool, and I love them. And that's why Headless Cross is where it's at for me, in that position at number 11. Now, going up to the top, we're in the top 10 now. Number 10, coming in at number 10 for me is Sabotage. This one, too, also gets an 8.25 out of 10. Sabotage, 1975 this came out. This was the last good album with Ozzy before Technical Ecstasy and Never Say Die, in my opinion. Sabotage is a really cool album. I think it often gets overlooked by some of the earlier stuff, rightfully so. That was some of the greatest music ever made, in my opinion. But there's some damn good stuff on here. I mean, Hole in the Sky is awesome. Symptom of the Universe. Those two songs in particular are really, really good. And I love Megalomania. It's almost 10 minutes long. I mean, it's so proggy. So proggy. I freaking love it. And the Writ, too, is another proggy song on this that's, almost 9 minutes long. There's just some really cool progressive ideas on here that kick ass, and I love what they did with it. This is the original Sabbath lineup, and an interesting tidbit and fact on here is Will Malone did the arrangements on this record, and Will Malone actually was the producer for the original Iron Maiden album. So it's kind of cool how they're tied together that way. I think that's really neat. But yeah, just a really cool, progressive, interesting record. And the history of Black Sabbath, I mean, they went through so many different producers. Some of the ones obviously better than others, but this one, for what it is awesome. It's a nice change. This is kind of like they were being more progressive, but also at the same time sticking to the originality of what they came out with that made them so popular and interesting and revolutionary in the first place. But I do love Sabotage. Great record. And like I said, the last good record with Ozzy, from the original years until 13 that came out decades later, right? So that's where Sabotage is for me. Moving on from Sabotage at number 9. This is an 8.5 out of 10. This is 1973's Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath is fucking unbelievable. It's one of my favorite Sabbath records, and I know it's at number 9 on this list, but I remember listening to this when I was a kid, and I was like, holy shit, is this dark, man? This is some scary shit. I remember listening to like Spiral Architect and the title track and Sabracadabra and songs like that, Fluff, the instrumental, and just being like, man, this is dark. But I love it. And those songs I just mentioned in particular, they're my favorite on this record. Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath is absolutely proggy and killer. Spiral Architect is unbelievable. Sabracadabra is unbelievable. Some of the coolest, most progressive, interesting, gut-punching, melodic, concise, experimental Sabbath songs ever made. And this record is just killer. I mean, these next couple ones I'm going to talk about, they are absolutely unbelievable. Just how they are and what they sound like and what they represent and what they mean. So I don't want to spend too much time on Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath because I'm kind of going to segue into these next two or 3. Well, the next 2 are kind of similar in that same vein with Sabbath Black Sabbath. Moving on from Sabbath Black Sabbath at number 8, another 8.5 out of 10 for me is the original Black Sabbath album in 1970. This one is just unbelievable. I don't know what to say. This is the first album produced by Roger Bain. Like I said, they've had so many producers. It's been unbelievable. But some of the most classic songs on here. Black Sabbath, The Wizard, NIB, Behind the Wall of Sleep. NIB is one of my favorite Black Sabbath songs of all time. The message is really cool. I think it's interesting. You know, the whole nativity in black ideology, like what's it mean? It's about the devil and what happens if he actually does fall in love with somebody. It's interesting. Or like a temptation of it. I just like the philosophical and the religious component and the connotation behind it. I think it's neat. I think it's cool. It makes you think. It leaves things ambiguous for you when you're thinking about these things. The original riff, the Black Sabbath with Tony, bending the freaking strings at the top of his guitar to make the cringy opening lyric sounds, and his hammer-ons and pull-offs. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Super eerie. The album artwork is super iconic. Goes down in history as one of the coolest, most creepy artworks on an album of all time. I love it. Enough said about the original album. I mean, listen to the original record. These songs are just timeless and kick-ass. Moving on from that, another 8.5 out of 10. So Sabbath Black Sabbath, 8.5. Black Sabbath, 8.5. Number 7 is Volume 4. Another 8.5 out of 10. I give this one. Volume 4. Oh my god, 1972. This thing is unfreaking believable. For the longest time, I didn't really care for Volume 4 when I first started getting into metal, and hard rock music. I was like, it's not that great. I think the other Sabbath albums are better. But, man, over the years, I started to love it. Say what you want to about Changes. Yes, it's kind of like, I don't want to say it's a ballad, but it does have like a ballad vibe to it. But freaking Wheels of Confusion, Tomorrow's Dream, Snowblind, St. Vitus Dance, Under the Sun, freaking Supernaut is unbelievable. The riff. I mean, that's classic. This is them at like their progressive peak as far as I'm concerned. This is when they push their progressive ideas from the records prior to like this kind of like progressive edge. And while Sabotage, was a little bit more of a expansion upon that, as well as Sabbath Bloody Sabbath was, this I think was where they really had a nice mixture and balance of progressive stuff with doomy stuff and the original stuff, and it's a really nice balance. It's probably the most balanced, I would say, Sab album and by balanced I mean where they're expressing themselves in new ways and have new ideas and are progressive, but also holding on to that classic sound and that doominess and, the atmospheric and eeriness of the original stuff. This is like a really good mixture of that, and it's probably the best one with Ozzy in terms of a nice balance between those two ideas, and I think they execute it really, really well on this. It's excellent. I mean, it's excellent. Again, different producer on this one. I mean, like I said, they've had so many. Patrick Meehan's a producer on this one. They've had so many people, doing different records with them. And, a lot of the time, the whole band themselves are producers on this, too, and making the subtle production tweaks and things as well. So, but yeah, it's Volume 4. Moving on from number 7, Volume 4, to number 6, Master of Reality. This is the first 9 out of 10. This record came out in 1971. This is Roger Bain again. And, man, Master of Reality, this is my shit. This is like where I'm starting to be like, alright, this is my Sabbath. This is the shit that I started listening to when I was getting into metal, when I was younger, in middle school and high school, really trying to get into, quote-unquote classic rock, but it was, Sabbath, the darker classic rock. Oh, Sabbath, it's cool, it's scary, interesting. But I mean, freaking Sweet Leaf, After Forever, Solitude, Into the Void, Lord of this World, and then the absolutely gut-punching and one of my favorite Sabbath songs again, Children of the Grave. That riff is just amazing. I mean, it's epic, explosive, bombastic, in-your-face, doom, heavy metal. I freaking love Master of Reality. A kick-ass album. The first 9 out of 10 on this list. Moving on for Master of Reality. Another 9 out of 10, and in my opinion, the absolute best album during the early Aussie years was Sabbath. The best Aussie album. One of the greatest. We're in top 5 territory now. This is number 5. Top 5 territory. One of the greatest albums of all time. Period. 1970s. Paranoid. This thing is loaded. This is like Led Zeppelin, Zeppelin 4. This thing is loaded with all of the good shit. This is Iron Maiden's Number of the Beast. This thing is War Pigs, Paranoid, Planet Caravan, Iron Man, Electric Funeral, Hand of Doom, Rat Salad, and Fairies Wear Boots. The most complete record. Like I said, this is Led Zeppelin, Zeppelin 4, Iron Maiden's Number of the Beast. This is Metallica's Master of Puppets, whatever you want to call it. This is Deep Purple's Machine Head. Whatever you want to call this freaking thing, it's the most complete album. It has all the popular songs on it, the greatest hits, if you will, of Black Sabbath. If you look at a greatest hits album, or a Sabbath album of greatest hits, half of this damn album is on it. War Pigs, Paranoid, Iron Man, Fairies Wear Boots is usually on every album. I mean, half of the record is on every greatest hits. That tells you that this album is the cream of the crop. And this is the best Aussie album. I mean, I've already said it. I've already talked about the songs that are timeless. When you listen to Sabbath, and when people hear the name Black Sabbath, they automatically think of Iron Man, Paranoid, and War Pigs. I mean, it's just, those 3 songs in particular are kind of like ingrained in Sabbath DNA. Like when you hear Black Sabbath, you're probably thinking, or Finish With My Woman Because She Couldn't Help Me With My Mind, or Generals Gathered in Their Masses, Just Like Witches at Black Masses. I mean, that's what you hear. And that's why this album and this record is so timeless and at the very freaking top 5 in my list for some of the greatest Sabbath records of all time. And if this was your number 1, I couldn't argue with you. Some people like the Aussie stuff more, some people like the Dio stuff more. That's kind of where the camp's divided in some places. But for me, as we continue down the list here, you're going to see what camp I like the most, because we haven't talked about the stuff yet, but we're getting there. So moving on from Paranoid, another 9 out of 10 album for me. This one's coming in at number 4 on my list. And this one is 1992's Dehumanizer with Ronnie James Dio. As Tony says, Ronnie. This thing is so freaking heavy. It's probably the heaviest Sabbath album ever made. And, it really is. One of the darkest and heaviest Sabbath records ever made, in my opinion. The title track is absolutely unbelievable. Computer God, amazing. After All, or quote-unquote The Dead, amazing. Time Machine's a little popular sounding. They did it for the Bill and Ted's movie, but Excellent Adventure movie or whatever it was, or Wayne's World, or one of those movies, whatever it was. Absolutely phenomenal. Sins of the Father, amazing. Too Late, great. Buried Alive, amazing. And the freaking song on this record that is absolutely killer, amazing, gut-punching, in your face, bang your head to this shit is I. The song I freaking love every second of that song, from the really ambient opening and how it builds and just explodes, and Dio's vocals are just, he shatters worlds and planets and universes. Ronnie, And that's kind of where I'm at right now. We're sitting here at number 4 with Dehumanizer the Record. I am a Ronnie fan, Ronnie and Black Sabbath. I think the best work that Ronnie James Dio ever did and the best work that Tony Iommi ever did was when they were with each other. When Ronnie was with Tony and when Tony was with Ronnie. I think the stuff that they did with Sabbath and Heaven and Hell is the best work in both of their entire careers and their catalogs. It's excellent. It's absolutely amazing. And I love this record, as I said, for the reasons I just mentioned. Moving on from that, number 3. This is technically a Heaven and Hell record, The Devil You Know. This one's a 9.25 out of 10. This one came out in 2009. This is the last studio LP that Ronnie ever recorded before he died in 2010 from stomach cancer. Rest in peace, Ronnie. The whole metal community loves you. I miss you every day. I wish you were still around. To this day, Ronnie James Dio and Bruce Dickinson are my 2 favorite. Throw Halford in there too. My top 3 favorite vocalists all time, period, in any genre of music is those 3 guys. I love them all. Ronnie and Bruce in particular, I mean, they're neck and neck with each other. I love them both. Slight edge to Ronnie a little bit just because the guy, his voice was immaculate. I mean, it was perfect. There was nothing that the guy couldn't sing. And I love everything that he did. Like I said earlier in this podcast episode, everything that he touched turned to gold. And The Devil You Know is no exception for that. It's absolutely phenomenal. I love the record. Adam and Evil is amazing. Fear is amazing. Eating the Cannibals, absolutely amazing. My favorite song on the record is Follow the Tears. It's unbelievable. Bible Black, oh my freaking God. Again, this is a really cool, transition for Ronnie too, where he's kind of taking on this more darker tone and darker thing. He's still singing about fantastical stuff, but he's melding it with a more darker religious overtone. And I think it works amazing with Sabbath, and that's why, like I said, the stuff that he did with Tony Iommi and Black Sabbath is the best work he's ever done, because they just had this amazing connection with each other. Tony Iommi's solo work in this is unbelievable. This is another thing I want to point out. Tony Iommi's guitar solos, not that they weren't awesome in the early stuff we just talked about with Ozzy, with Master of Reality and Paranoid, and Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, the original record, and all that stuff, and Volume 4, and all those albums. But when he worked with Ronnie, it was almost like his guitar playing was elevated to another level or two. He just became more experimental, more progressive. His solos were more polished, more refined, more dynamic. He just expanded and grew as a player. Dio brought out the best in him and his guitar playing, as he did with Geezer, as he did with, Bill, and then Vinny Appice. Because Vinny did a bunch of stuff with Dio on his solo work, and some of the greatest records of all time: Holy Diver, Last in Line. Keep going, right? But that is exactly why I'm in the Dio camp, because Dio just brought out the best in the band, and in particular Tony Iommi, and made him a better player, and that's what I love about it. And now we're going to get to the top 2. Coming in at number 2. 1981's The Mob Rules. The Mob Rules. This is an underrated freaking record. This is one of the greatest heavy metal records of all time, period. Produced by Martin Birch, another connection to Maiden, the guy who did some of the greatest Iron Maiden records of all time, Killers Up to Fear of the Dark. He's freaking doing The Mob Rules. Martin Birch is a hell of a producer. In my opinion, the best producer that the guy's ever worked with. And this record, every song on this is absolutely amazing. And like I said, that's why it's a 9.5 out of 10. Turn Up the Night, Voodoo, The Sign of the Southern Cross, E5150, The Mob Rules, Country Girl, what a freaking tune. Slipping Away, Falling Off the Edge of the World, over and over. This is absolutely killer. This is absolutely freaking killer. I can't say anything else about this record besides listen to it, spin it. Everything I just echoed about why Tony Iommi and Dio did the best work together, it's because of this record. Put it on, listen to it. Solos are amazing. The lyrics are concise. The production is phenomenal. This thing is a fucking gem. A gem. And I love it. It's one of the greatest Black Sabbath albums ever made. One of their best, obviously, is my second favorite, and one of the greatest records of all time. Put it on and listen to it. Put it on and freaking listen to it. And that brings us to number one, the greatest Black Sabbath record, in my opinion, to this day. Again, produced by Martin Birch. This freaking record is one of my favorite albums of all time, period. Period. Not just in Sabbath, but in music in general. Heaven and Hell. First record when Ronnie joined Black Sabbath. Man, from beginning to end, this record, much like the Mob Rules as well, much like The Devil You Know, much like Dehumanizer, you know, in particular, this and the Mob Rules together, wow. Beginning to end, 10 out of 10. Perfect. Perfect. Neon Nights, Children of the Sea, Lady Evil, the title track, Heaven and Hell, beautiful. Dio played it on his solo stuff too. I mean, he loved it. He played a lot of these songs on his solo stuff because he co-wrote a lot of them or wrote a lot of them. Wishing Well, Die Young, Walk Away, Lonely is the Word. Give me this record for breakfast, lunch, dinner, a midday snack, dessert. It is the quintessential heavy metal album, the quintessential Sabbath album, truly the quintessential Dio album. Dio, like I said, everything he touched turned to gold. If I was to sit here and talk about Ronnie James Dio and I said, what are the top 3 albums that he did, in your opinion? And I had to pick from all his different, variations of bands he was in. Heaven and Hell from Sabbath is up there as number 1, probably, maybe number 2. And outside of that, obviously, Holy Diver. Unbelievable, his solo stuff. And then after that, we're talking about Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow, the original album. A lot of people say Rising is better, which I could see why. Stargazer, that whole record is amazing. The stuff he did with Ritchie, the 3 Rainbow albums he did with Ritchie Blackmore, amazing. But I love the rawness and structure of the original record. Those 3 records, this one included. Some days I like Heaven and Hell a little bit better than the original Rainbow, Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow record. Some days I like the original Rainbow record better than this, but they are always at the top. They are always at the top of the conversation when it comes to talking about Ronnie James Dio albums and records. This thing is absolutely phenomenal. Everything I said. Tony sounds fucking unbelievable. It's almost like he's a different guitar player at this point. It's almost like it's a different band, a new band, a phenomenal band. This is my favorite incarnation of the band. This is, it's a shame that they had, their trials and their tribulations and their turmoil with each other over the years, because if they would have been consistent from 1980 all the way up to when Ronnie sadly passed away in 2010, they could have churned out some of the most amazing music of all time. And I truly mean that. But with the structure of things, Iommi and Dio and Ronnie, they both went off and did their own things. Tony did all the stuff with, he tried to experiment. He did stuff with Ian Gillan, did stuff with Glenn Hughes, he had Ray Gillan in the band for a little bit, got Tony Martin, Dio came back, Dio left, Tony Martin came back in. It's just, and then they eventually rekindled their relationship. They forgave each other, and then they churned out, after Dehumanizer, they got back together, and they did those 3 bonus tracks too on the Dio box set I didn't talk about that they just wrote. That would have been cool if they would have did like 5 more songs and did another album. But if you get a chance to listen to those songs too, Ear in the Wall, Shadow of the Wind, and The Devil Cried, they released that on the Dio compilation CD when Dio rejoined the band, Black Sabbath, Dio years, and then they eventually later became Heaven and Hell. Just phenomenal. But anyway, that's been my ranking of the Black Sabbath records from my least favorite to my favorite. That to this day, I mean, it's the same ranking. It's going to be the same ranking probably for the rest of my life. You know, it's just, I love Dio. I love everything he did, and those records that he did with Sabbath are some of the most timeless, absolutely phenomenal records of all time. Martin Birch is a hell of a producer too. You know, hats off to him. May he rest in peace as well. Amazing stuff he's done in his career with some of the greatest bands of all time, in my opinion. And this is no exception. And this is one of those records and one of those lineups and one of those incarnations of the band that is, in my opinion, the best. So, thanks for listening to the Hellacious Hero Returns. Everybody take care of yourselves. Have a great day out there. Be safe. Listen to your metal music. Read your comic books. Play your nerdy board games and your card games and your video games. And remember, always do you. I'll see you guys next time.